Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, right at the top of the Amud. Misaknin says Racham Vesar Chayvis. So the Mishnah said that they repair on the 15th of Adar, they repair the streets and the roads, the mikvois Samayim, and the mikvois V'Oisim called Tzarchei Rabim. And all of the public needs, the things that are needed for the public, we attend to on the 15th of Adar. The Gemara now brings down a brisa that elaborates what does it mean, Tzarchei Rabim. Elohein Tzarchei Rabim, the Mishnah says in Mein Kat that their Tzarchei Rabim are done on Chol HaMoed. What are Tzarchei Rabim? Done in Dinei Mominus. Bezdin can done monetary cases, Dinei Mominus, Dinei Nefashis, then Dinei Makis, and to give lashes Makis, Apoidim, Arochen V'Charomim V'Ekdeshis. And we redeem if a person made a neder, so he was a makdish something, he made a cherem, or he made erchin, so the before speak out that erchin is not really quite a case of a pigeon, it's not a case of poidin, but it's a case of collecting. So in all of these cases where Bezdin has to either redeem the amount that it was the person made the neder for, or to collect the amount of money that's owing, umashkin is the saita, and to give the saita the waters to drink, if there is a case of a saita, and she has to be given the waters to drink, then she's also done on Chol HaMoed. So that is also something that is done, considered Tzarchei Rabim, because we have to determine if there is this Ra over here at Biat HaRa, and we have to investigate, and therefore to determine if she's mutter to her husband or if she will be killed. Some learn that it doesn't mean that we give the water. The Rambam, the Tesis Yontav, based on the Rambam, says it's that we assess it. We don't actually give her to drink on the Chol HaMoed, but we investigate if she has to be given the water to drink. Uvesarfin as a para, and they burn the paraduma to have the ashes, to mix with the mechatos to be matar people, so it's considered Tzarchei Rabim. We have to be matar the Tmei Mesim, so they're serving as a para. V'arfim egla rufa, and egla rufa, if there was a mace lying around and we don't know who the killer was, so the city that's closest has to bring the calf, and they decapitate it, they break its neck in the Nachal. That is also done on Chol HaMoed, the Roisim Eved Ivri. We bore a hole through the Eved Ivri. If he wants to stay with his master, that's also done. Umetar and Metzera, and Metzera was Tomei, that we can be Metzera him. Umefarkin is a minimum alamayim, and they remove the lock from the boros of the water. And they used to have cisterns of water that during the rainy season, during the whole rainy season, it collected the water. It was opened up on Chol HaMoed Pesach, that's after the rainy season, so that the public can use it, the rabbi can use it to irrigate the water, to use the water. And we don't put the locks back until the end of the summer, again prior to the new rainy season. Taban Tanina, we learned in the mission over there, Mashkin Beis HaShalch, and that we can water and irrigate a field that has to be irrigated, that can't be irrigated just on rainwater, we have to irrigate it, then we are allowed to water it on a Chol HaMoed, u'mitzayin ala kavaros. And you're allowed to make the marking where there's a kever, where there's a grave, you're allowed to put where the markings are, so people should know that there's a kever over there and keep away from the tumah. Well, it was already marked from 15th of Adar, why would they have to do it on Chol HaMoed? More answers, but I can answer that even though it's not common, it's not usual, but it could be that after the 15th of Adar there still was a heavy rainfall, and the heavy rainfall washed away the lime that was on the markers. It says and you can go inspect the fields for kilayim on Chol HaMoed, practicing more like Adar. Didn't they go already earlier from the 15th of Adar? Potter, you can answer Shaisa Shana Fail, just the opposite, that the year was a late year, the crops grew very late, and therefore it was unusual in the fact that the crops grew very late, and therefore on the 15th of Adar they couldn't properly inspect it, so they inspected on Chol HaMoed. So it mentions that we mark the graves of the Kfar Minayin L'Sion. Where's the makor for this, that we mark the graves? Rabbi Berchaya, Rabbi Yaakov, Barbas Yaakov, B'Shem Rav Chunaya, the Devras Chavrin said, he said it in the name of Chunya, of the town of Bras Chavrin. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi B'Shem Rav Yaakov, Baruch B'Shem Rav Chunya, the Bras Chivrin. He said in the name of Rav Chunya of the town Bras Chivrin. Rabbi Chizkiah, Rabbi Uziel, Brei Rav Chunya, the Beis Chavrin, B'Shem Rav Chunya, the Beis Chavrin. He said it Rav Chunya, Beis Chavrin. What is the Makor? I'll upon what is the Makor? The Pasuk says, Tomei Yikra, that the Messiah calls out Tomei Tomei. Why is it required to do that? So that the Tumah calls out to you and says to you, and says to you, keep away. So therefore we always have to have markings, and therefore at Sion, that people should know that they have to keep away from the Tumah. Rabbi Yila B'Shem Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, he says that this in a different pasuk says V'avra Ivrim Ba'aretz V'ra Etzem Adam Uvana Eslet Tzion. It says the people will pass by, they'll see a bone of a man and build a marker. So you see, you need a tzion. So we darshan Etzem Mikan Shemitzayin Al Atzomas. From here we learn out that we make a marker for bones. Now we're make the tzion, we make something on a kever, something that's matama ba'oil. So if it's a complete mess, it's matama ba'oil. But it's coming to teach you that even bones. Now, what type of bones are matama b'oil? So, if you have a roiv kav of atzamais, so it's matama oil, make it tzion. Odam mikan shemitzayim l'shen v'golgoles. Teaches us that if you have the spine and the skull and the spine, it's also matama b'oil. You make it tzion. Or if you have the number of roiv minyan or roiv binyan of atzamais, so these cases then it's metama ba'oil. So if you have atzomas, you have roiv kav, you have minyan, the number of the majority of the number of bones, or the roiv binyan, or what it's the frame of the person. So which includes his frame. So if you have the sheder and golgolis, then it's metama. You make it tziyun. Ubana, you build evan kavua. You see from here that you make a marker on something that's kavua, a stone that is attached to the ground. The tzion has to be something that's a bona, which is a binyan, which is attached to the ground, not something that moves around from place to place, because then it'll distort where is the tumah. You have to know that the tumah is here, so it has to be bona, something that's fixed in its place, that they know that this is the place of the tumah. Im Oimer at al gabe even telusha, if you would say that we'd make the marking the tzion on a detached stone, one that's not attached to the ground, then it would not be serve as a deterrent or as a reminder, because the stone would get pushed and travel to other distances. It has to be something that's fixed into the ground, that you know that there's a marking that there's a kever here. If the stone be marked and it's something that it's detached, that you could move, it'll travel all over, so you really won't know where the kever is. You won't be able to identify the mess. He continues on the darshaning the pasuk, Etzlai, you make the tziyun next to it, Lamokam Tahar. You put it in a place where the stone is, in a place which is tahor. You don't put it on top of the kever, you put it on next to it, on a place which is tahor, because otherwise the person, if it's the tzion is on top of the kever, by the time he comes to the tzion, he'll already be tamei. So you put it next to it, so that's a deterrent, that it prevents them from coming to the kever. Tzion, it says, it's tzion, then we learn out, mikan le tzion. Here we see that you're supposed to make a marker, you make it tzion. So that's what the pasuk says, banu etzloi tzion, you're supposed to make it tzion. Here we see this din of making the marker to keep people tahor, to keep them away from the tumah. Tani umatze even achas mitzuyenes. If a person found one stone and it's marked, so that indicates that there's a kever. Now there's only one stone, so there's only one stone. You don't know where the kever is. Is it on this side of the stone or on the other side of the stone? So in such a case, afal pishein mekaim mekain, even though that's not the way to make the tzion, as we said before, the tzion has to be not on top of the kever, but here there's only one stone, so there's no indication where the kever is on this side or the other. In this case, we must say that the kever is underneath it. So therefore, hamayil aleh tame, someone is mile over it is tame, because in this case we have to say that the stone is over the kever. Because on the Yomer maze, haya nosen tachta, that there is a maze underneath the stone. However, if there's two stones, then we say hamal aleh tar. Then we say that someone who's mal over the stones is tor. Ubeineim tome. So we say if there's two stones, meaning it's marking it off the way it's supposed to mark it off, that it's not under the stone, it's to the side of the stone. If there's two stones, we say the area between the stones, that's where the kever is, and that's if he's mal over there, it's tome. Imaya charish ben time, but if the area between the stones is plowed, so that indicates that there's no kever over there. We treat the stones as individual stones, like the previous case, beinayam tar. Then in this case we say between the stones is tar, because it was plowed, and al gabeim tame, and the stone themselves are tame, because we have to assume in this case that the kever is underneath the stones. Tani, we learned ein mitzayin al basar. You do not make it seen on basar that is tame, on the flesh that was tame. If there's no bones, you don't make it seen on the basar. Shemin is hakal basar, because if you make it seen, maybe during the course of time, this basar, even if it was a shear, and even if it did have a kazayas of a mess, but it decomposed, and it's less than a kazayas, and therefore if you make it seem, people will assume that it's tame. If it comes into contact with taharas, they'll burn the taharas, and then if it's a kaidish, it's truma or kachim, they'll burn it shalaikadin. So therefore we don't make the tzion, because the nature is over the course of time, the derech hateva, the basar will decompose and it will become less than the shear. Rav Yusta bar Shunem boy kumi Rabbi Mona. She asked, well, if you're not going to make it seen on the basar, won't it turn out that what you're doing is going to be matame taras l'mafreya? Maybe it does have a shear, and it hasn't been decomposed, and if you're not going to mark it off, people will bring that their taras over there, it'll be matame, the kachim, and the truma, it'll be matame l'mafreya. So why shouldn't we mark it off? He answered, better that there's the risk for a short-term kilkul, a short-term ruin, that perhaps that will happen, but in the longer term, you'll prevent more taras from becoming burnt, because in the longer term, the more likely scenario is that over the longer term that the basar will decompose, it'll be less than the shear, and if you're going to mark it off, people will assume that the taras are tame, so in the longer term, this is the better solution. Sagt the Mishnah, Amar Rav Yehuda, B'Rishayna Haya Oikim Mashleichim Lefneim. So we learned that on the 15th of Adar, that the Bezdin sends shlichim and they go to inspect the fields. Now, if they inspect the fields, what happens if they do find kalayim? So he said, when the inspectors would come and they would find the kalayim, they would uproot it and they would throw it in front of the farmers. But once there were people who were increased the oivre aver, there was a proliferation of oivre avera. They wouldn't throw it in front of them, but they would throw it, uproot it, tear it out, and pluck it out and throw it on the roads. Then, however, ultimately, they were instituted later on that the inspectors should be mafkir the field for the people who were Mekayim Kalayim, that they should be mafkir their field. So like the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, Chule Talne, the Brisa says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Rishon Haya Arkimash Lechem Lefneim. Originally, the inspectors would pull out the kalayim and throw it in front of the farmers. And the farmers were happy for two reasons. Achaz Shahim and Nachem Shladusayim, while the inspectors pulled it out, so they were weeding the field. They pulled out the other minim, the minim that grew over there, and they were pulling them out, and that allowed the fields to grow better. They were weeding it, so to speak, or pulling out the other minim, which would help the growth of the crops of the field. That's number one. Secondly, and secondly, they were happy because now they had this kalaim, they had these vegetables that they could use and have enough from. So they were happy for two reasons. When the people who were they were increased the number of people over Aveira, then they changed their approach. They plucked it out, but didn't throw it in front of them. They threw it on the roads that would be trampled by the people. But nevertheless, the farmers were still happy for one reason, even though they didn't get the benefit of the kilayim because it was trampled on by the people on the roads, but still, they were happy that they were weeding the field. So ultimately, so then the Chamim instituted that they were mafkir the whole field. So it said they were mafkir. So, in fact, the Gemara, minayin shehefker bezdin hefker. Where do we know that bezdin has the kayach, that they have the ability and the power to declare something ownerless, to be mafkir? It says, the Pasuk says, whoever does not come within 3 days, as the Zakanim and the Sarim that they are proposing, it says that it will be they'll confiscate his property, and he'll be separated from all the people in the Goyla. So that was by Ezra, they made this takana. So you see that they have the ability to be mafkir. The Bezdin has the ability to make something hefker, to make a property ownerless. Now, how do we know when they do make something hefker that it's potter min a meiser? The Torah says, "Ubar Levi kein lo chelach v'nach le'imach." The Levi comes and you give him meiser. So we darshan when there's something on what type of crops do you have to give meiser? That's something where the Levi is disadvantaged, where he doesn't have a chelak v'nachla. But in an area where he's equal to everybody else, where he's not disadvantaged, then there's no chiv of meiser. So hefker, the Levi is the same as anybody else. It belongs to nobody, and anybody could be zeich in it. So over there, the person who is zeich in the hefker, he does acquire the hefker, he does not have to give the meiser. How do I know that this applies even to the hefker that's the result of hefker bezdin hefker? So Rabbi Yonasan Brei Rabbi Yischabar Acha, he says, Shma la min hado. We can learn it from the following brisa. It says, Ein ma'avnes hashana. We don't make an ibr year, we don't make an extra month, loy b'shvius, not in the year of shvius, or loy b'nsay shvius, and not in the year following shvius. So we don't make the shvius year longer, we don't make an extra month, because it's a year where the people cannot work the field, and an extra month would impose an extra burden, an extra hardship. It's one more month where they can't work the field, and they can't now tend to the crops and plant and have new crops. And they don't do it from Motzei Shvius either. They don't do it on Motzei Shvius either. We'll see why shortly. V'im Yivrua, but if they did do it, Harezim Uberes. There is the year, if they did it becomes an every year. Now this extra month that he adds on to the Shemitah year, isn't it potter from Meises? So therefore you see, if they're not supposed to add on an extra month, but if they do add an extra month, then it's binding. Now, this becomes a Shemitah year. It becomes a month of a Shemitah year, which the produce on the Shemitah year is hefker, pochman meises, and this extra month that Bezdin added also is pochman meises. So doesn't that show you that the hefker of Bezdin is pochman meises? So the Gemara will continue, and then we'll come back to this raya and ask a kasha on this raya. But the Gemara now continues to analyze the brisa. So, ad kadan necha shvius, matzei shvius, we understand why they don't add an extra month to the Shemitah year. Why don't they add an extra month to Motzei Shvius? Amar Rabbi Abun Shaloi l'Rabbas B'Yisur Chodesh. They don't, because by extending the year after Shemitah, it extends the length of time to when they can have the new produce. Now, the year of the after Shemitah, they didn't plant on the 7th year, so they don't have, on the 8th year, they don't have old produce, they only have the new produce. If you extend the year, you add an extra month, that means that they cannot eat from the cholish, from the new produce, it becomes a month later. It's only 16th of Nisan. If there's an extra order, that pushes off a month later to the time when they're allowed to eat from the new produce. And since they don't have old produce, that imposes a hardship. That you said that is we don't make an extra month of Shemitah year. That's ad kishloi the Rebbe lavi yark mechutz laaretz. So that's only prior to the time when Rebbe was matri allowed to bring vegetables from chutz laaretz Eretz Yisrael. So then we say they don't have other produce. They can't bring it from chutz laaretz. It's before that heter, so they don't have other produce. Don't make an extra month. But after already he was matired, so they have other produce. They have other vegetables. They have from chutz laaretz. So he shall shar shnei yeshua. Then there's no difference between the Shemitah year and the other years because they do have other sources of food. So Tane ein ma'abrim, that we don't make an extra month in the Shemitah year. Now, what about the year following? Amar of Mimane, Hadat Adat Amar, that you said, Brishoina Shayu Hashanam Kesikna, that the year, the 8th year, the year following Shemitah year, we don't make it in Ibri year. That's when the years where the growth cycle, the cycle is in the natural state, when the crops they had it in the normal time. But now that the years are not, the cycle of when the crops grow is not in the normal natural state, or he motzei shviyas, he shar shnei shvua. The 8th year is the same as the other years, because since the years are not, the crops don't grow in the normal way, the crops get delayed anyway, the growth gets delayed anyway, so therefore there's no hardship imposed by making an extra month, because in any event the crops are not going to be ready by what would have been the 16th of Nisan, so therefore delaying it by a month does not impose a hardship. When they wanted to make the 8th year an Ibri year, the year following Shemitah, they declared it immediately. They declared it in the Tishrei of that year. They declared it at the beginning of the 8th year. They declared that it will be a Ibri year. There will be an extra month. Now you want to make a proof that when it's Hefker Bezdin Hefker, that there's a P'tur Mimais, because you see that B'di'evet, if Bezdin made an extra month in the Shemitah year, is binding. Less ad shma mina klum. You cannot learn out anything from that, because the Torah says Shmar is Chodesh Ovid. The Torah says guard the month of Ovid, the spring of the ripening, meaning that Shemresh Yava B'chidusha, that you should guard it, ensure that it comes by the beginning of, it comes in the month of Nisan, when the new moon of the new cycle of the months comes. So therefore, Bezdin has the authority to make an Ibri year, to align the seasons with Nisan, that the Aviv, the spring, the time when the crops grow, it should come in the Nisan time. So therefore, they have the right to make an extra month in the Shemitah year. They have the right to make it Hefker. So if they have that right, if they have the full right to do it, Memela, therefore, there is a P'tur in Maisus. Meaning, the Gemara understood, the way Tikkun Chatan learns it, the Gemara understood that Bezdin has the right to do it. But the question is that when they make an extra month of the Shemitah year, do they have the right to just add it to the Shemitah year? And there's an extra month in the year, but it doesn't have a complete din of Hefker. Or do we say, once they have the right to make it, it has a din of a Hefker Gomer. It's completely Hefker, and therefore it affects even the din of Meisters. So the Gemara is tiny, you don't have a raya from here that Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker, because since the Torah gives the right of Bezdin to make an extra month, in fact, they're empowered to make this Hefker. So it's not a Hefker that comes from arbitrarily from the decision of Bezdin, the Torah empowers that. In this case, the question that we have is, do we see that even where it's Bezdin being mafkir on their own, based on their own determination, then is it also, do we pater from Meisers? So, the Haida Alma Ado. So where do we see this? When do we see that? Where did you say that when Bezdin is mafkir that we see that it's the patur of Meisers? From the following: Gadish aloi lukatachta. If you have a pile of grain, and underneath it there was some leket that was not collected by the aniyim. Now the leket that was supposed to be left is supposed to be left to the aniyim. Over here, he put a pile of his own grain on the grain that was supposed to belong to the aniyim. So it was on the leket that the aniyim did not gather. So it's on their produce. So kol hanoigis ba'aretz harei zeh shel harehen shel aniyim. All of the grain that's touching the ground belongs to the aniyim. Meaning that in addition to whatever leket was there that came from the aniyim or belonged to the aniyim, they made a knas and they said that they were mafkir this, and they said any grain that's touching the ground belongs to the aniyim. Ve'omar Rabbi Ami b'shem Rav Shimon ben Lakish, and Rav Ami said the same Rav Shimon ben Lakish, the Beis Shammai. That is the halacha. That's halacha is according to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai, there's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If hefker la'aniyim is hefker, if you can make something hefker only for the aniyim, which is this case over here, we're saying that it becomes a property of the aniyim. That we wanted to say that whatever is touching the ground should belong, is now ownerless. From the perspective of the owner, it's taken away from the owner, and it's hefker, but only for aniyim. That's the shlit of Beis Shammai, that hefker l'aniyim, if it's hefker, but it's not for anybody, it's not for everybody, it's only for aniyim, that's considered hefker. But according to Ibn Beis Hillel, no, they hold that to be hefker, it has to be hefker for everybody. It can't be just for the aniyim. Aniyim oichlem ma'asrim. Therefore, according to Beis Hillel, the poor people can eat it, but it's not considered really hefker gomor, because it's not hefker because the wealthy people can't take it. So therefore, as far as the patur of meiser goes, it's not patur mi meiser. The aniyim can take it. That's a takana of Bezdin. It belongs to the aniyim, but it's not really hefker, and therefore they have to take meiser. But Rabbi Yossi says no. Shamanu shu patur mi meiser divrakol. He says the patur of meiser is according to everybody. Mishum kanasa, because it's a kanas. Meaning, because the Bezdin made a knas on the owner, and they made a knas because he piled his grain on it, and therefore they made the hefker, and they declared it hefker, meaning, and therefore even though it's mitzad din wouldn't be hefker, but this is a Bezdin hefker, hefker Bezdin hefker. They made it hefker, and therefore Mamela is potter from Meiser. So you see that hefker Bezdin hefker is potter mi Meiser.